The email landed in my inbox with the force of a guillotine blade. It wasn't the words themselves. Corporate jargon was always a shield, but the cold, final finality of them. Account reassignment, Ethelred Solutions. The deal that was supposed to be my masterpiece, my career-defining summit, had been plucked from my hands the moment I planted the flag. A chill, sharp and venomous, coiled in my stomach as I saw his name listed as the new lead. Ken, my manager. The man whose most strenuous quarterly activity was adjusting his ergonomic chair. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. This wasn't just a stolen commission. It was a public execution, a knife carved neatly between my ribs while he smiled and shook my hand. He had just erased me. And I knew, with the chilling certainty of a deathbed promise, that I would make him regret the day he ever learned my name. The first notebook was a cheap, spiral-bound thing I'd bought at a drugstore. Its cover was a ghastly floral pattern, a tragic misjudgment made during a caffeine-fueled haze before an 8 a.m. client meeting my first year on the job. Inside, my handwriting was a frantic scrawl, a desperate attempt to capture every stray detail that might give me an edge. Mr. Abernathy's daughter is applying to Georgetown. Mrs. Chen's assistant, Brenda, is the real gatekeeper. She loves dark chocolate with almonds. The CIO at Sterling is a frustrated musician who still plays gigs on weekends. Over the years, the notebooks became a system. Moleskins, always black, with color-coded tabs and a cross-referencing index I'd designed myself. They were my external brain, a living library of relationships, aspirations, and vulnerabilities. They held the secret language of my clients, the subtle cues that turned a maybe into a yes. They were the reason I was the top saleswoman in the company, the reason I was about to close the Ethelred Solutions deal, the largest in our FI. RM's history. Ken used to mock them relentlessly. He'd saunter over to my desk, hands in his pockets, a smug little grin playing on his lips. "Still writing in your diary, Hannah?" he'd ask, loud enough for the whole sales floor to hear. "You know, we have Salesforce for that. It's this new thing called technology." The sycophants would chuckle. I would just smile, a tight, thin line. "It works for me, Ken. Whatever you say. Just don't waste too much billable time playing secretary." The Ethelred deal was my baby. I had nurtured it for 18 months, from a cold call to a near-certain close. I'd mapped out their entire corporate structure, understood their 5-year growth plan better than their own VPs, and built a genuine rapport with their CEO, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed. We were on the 1-yard line. The final contracts were drawn up. The signing was scheduled for Friday. The commission, a life-altering sum, was more than a number. It was my mother's surgery. It was the end of the debt that had haunted my family for a decade. It was freedom, then came the email, Wednesday afternoon. To ensure a smooth finalization process and leverage senior leadership synergy, the Ethelred account will be transitioned to Ken for closing. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I walked to Ken's office, the email burning on my phone screen. He was leaning back in his chair, feet on his desk, admiring his reflection in the polished surface of his loafers. "Ken, what is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He didn't even bother to look at me. "Corporate decision, Hannah. Above my pay grade, you know how it is. They just wanted a senior manager to get it over the line." "Don't worry, you'll still get your base. You did good work, laid a nice foundation." Laid a nice foundation? I had built the goddamn cathedral from bedrock. "The signing is in 2 days," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Everything is done." "Almost done," he corrected, finally swiveling to face me. He gave me a patronizing smile. "It's a big deal, needs a steady, experienced hand for the final handshake. You get it." I didn't get it. Not then. But I would. On Friday, the announcement went out. Ken had officially closed the Ethelred deal. He was the hero. The Monday morning all-hands meeting was his coronation. He stood at the front of the conference room, basking in the applause, the CEO of our company patting him on the back. "This was a tough one, folks," Ken said, his voice oozing false modesty. "A real nail-biter." There were moments we thought it might slip away, but through persistence and some strategic, high-level negotiation, we managed to pull it through. He glanced in my direction, a flicker of something cruel in his eyes. Hannah did a great job with the initial groundwork, of course, but it needed a closer's touch to seal it. The implication was clear. I had fumbled. I couldn't handle the pressure. He, the valiant manager, had swooped in to save the day. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, a mixture of pity, suspicion, and a few glints of schadenfreude. I was no longer the sales queen. I was the girl who couldn't close. I had been publicly, humiliatingly erased. I sat there, a ghost at my own funeral, and clapped until my palms were raw. The first call I had to make was to my brother. "So, the money's coming through?" he asked, the hope in his voice a physical weight on my chest. I closed my eyes. There was a complication with the commission structure. It's been delayed. A lie, the first of many. I couldn't bring myself to tell him that the six-figure bonus I'd promised, the money that was supposed to pay for the specialist surgeon for our mother's heart condition, was gone. It was in Ken's bank account, probably already earmarked for a new boat or a gaudy watch. "Delayed?" My brother's voice tightened. "Hannah, Dr. Evans needs the deposit by the end of the month to hold her surgical slot." "You said it was a sure thing." "I know what I said," I snapped, my own panic turning into anger. "I'm handling it." I hung up and the silence of my apartment pressed in on me. The city lights glittered outside my window, a million tiny promises of a life I could no longer afford. My confidence, once a fortress, crumbled into dust. Was Ken right? Had I been naive? Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I was just a glorified secretary who took good notes, and when it came to the real endgame, I choked. The doubt was a poison, seeping into every thought. I replayed every conversation with Ethelred, every email, every meeting, searching for the mistake I must have made, the crack in my performance that justified Ken's intervention. I found nothing, which was somehow worse. It meant the betrayal was baseless, a simple, brutal act of theft. Work became a landscape of quiet humiliations. People who used to stop by my desk for advice now skirted around it. My name was conspicuously absent from emails about the Ethelred integration. I was a pariah. David, a senior colleague I'd always admired and who had mentored me in my early years, walked right past me in the hallway as if I were a stranger. He was on his way to a celebratory lunch with Ken. That cut deeper than I expected. It was the quiet, shunning betrayal of a coward, someone siding with power because it was easy. I was trapped in a cycle of shame and fury. I'd sit in my car in the parking garage after work, unable to drive, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my mind a storm of vengeful fantasies and crippling self-blame. Who was I without my success? My entire identity had been built on my competence, my reputation. Now I was nothing, a ghost haunting the halls of my own career. One evening, my phone buzzed. It was Maria, the junior associate I'd been mentoring. She was young, fiercely intelligent, and one of the few people who hadn't treated me like a leper. "Can you talk?" her text read. I met her at a quiet coffee shop miles away from the office. She looked nervous, clutching her latte like a lifeline. "I'm sorry to bother you, Hannah," she started, her eyes darting around. "It's just, I heard something. And I thought you should know." She took a deep breath. I was in the break room. Ken was in there with Mark from finance. He was bragging about the Ethelred deal. I braced myself. "He was laughing," Maria continued, her voice filled with disgust. He said closing it was the easiest thing he'd ever done." She hesitated, then her eyes met mine, steeling themselves. "He pulled something out of his briefcase. It was one of your notebooks, the black one with the red tab for Ethelred. He was waving it around. He said, 'The girl's a glorified secretary, but damn, she takes good notes.' All I had to do was read her script to Evelyn Reed." The whole thing was gift-wrapped. The world stopped. The clatter of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, it all faded into a dull roar. The poison of self-doubt that had been crippling me was instantly neutralized, replaced by something else. A pure, crystalline rage. It wasn't that I had failed. It was that my greatest strength, the very thing he ridiculed, had been the weapon he'd used against me. The meticulous, obsessive, brilliant work that he had dismissed as a waste of time. Chekhov's gun. The principle was simple. If you show a gun in the first act, it has to go off in the third. Ken had just shown me the gun. He had mocked my notebooks, then used them to ruin me. And in that moment, sitting in a generic coffee shop with a 22-year-old associate who still believed in right and wrong, I decided I was going to make that gun go off. Right in his face. The pain didn't vanish, but it changed. It morphed from a heavy, suffocating blanket into a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach. It was fuel. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my dining table with a fresh notebook, a new moleskine, the black cover like a starless night sky, and began to plan. The first phase was escape. The second was retribution. I spent the next week polishing my resume and quietly reaching out to my network. The name that kept coming up was Vanguard Investments, our fiercest competitor. They were known for being aggressive, innovative, and for rewarding talent lavishly. I landed an interview with their head of sales, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Alina Vance. The interview was going well. I walked her through my sales record, Ethelred conspicuously absent, of course, and my philosophy on client relationships. I could tell she was impressed. Then she paused, her expression shifting slightly. "I have to ask, Hannah," she said, her gaze direct. "Why are you looking to leave? Your record is stellar. And I'll be frank, I heard a whisper that there were some performance issues on your last big project." Ice flooded my veins. Ken. It had to be. He must have heard I was interviewing and made a call, planting a seed of doubt. He wasn't just content with stealing my victory. He wanted to salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. This was his counterattack, an attempt to cage me in my humiliation. The old Hannah would have stammered or gotten defensive. The new Hannah, the one forged in betrayal, smiled. "Performance issues are an interesting way to frame it," I said, my voice even. "Let me tell you what happened." I laid out the story, not with emotion, but with cold, hard facts. I told her about my 18 months of work, the imminent signing, and the last-minute leadership transition. I didn't call Ken a thief or a liar. I didn't have to. I just presented the timeline. Professionals in our world knew how to read between the lines. My performance issue, I concluded, was doing my job so thoroughly that my manager, who had zero involvement for a year and a half, could step in for the final 48 hours, read from my notes, and take the credit. My issue is that I made myself replaceable in the final hour. That's a mistake I don't intend to make again. Alina Vance watched me, her face unreadable. For a long, tense moment, she said nothing. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "I see," she said. "Well, Hannah, we don't reassign accounts from our top performers here. We give them bigger ones. When can you start?" I gave my 2 weeks, notice the next morning. Ken was predictably smug. "Decided to move on, eh? Probably for the best. A smaller pond, maybe. Find your level." He was so puffed up with his stolen glory that he couldn't see the threat standing right in front of him. He thought he had won. He had no idea the war was just beginning. My last day was a Friday. As I packed up my desk, I made a small, deliberate show of sorting through my old notebooks. I stacked a few of the older, out-of-date ones on the corner of my desk. My notes on Stratton Corp., a major client in my pipeline, were in that stack. The notes detailed their planned expansion into the Asian market, a strategy I knew from a confidential conversation with their CFO 2 weeks ago. They had completely abandoned in favor of a domestic merger. The notes also heavily featured their COO, a man named Gary, as the key decision-maker. Maria had told me last week that Gary had been unceremoniously fired. The new power player was a woman in their strategy department, someone I'd been cultivating a relationship with for months, whose name appeared nowhere in that old notebook. I forgot them on the desk. A little breadcrumb trail for a desperate, incompetent rat. I knew Ken would be in a bind. My entire pipeline, a portfolio of clients I'd spent years building, was now his responsibility. He didn't have the relationships. He didn't have the knowledge. All he had, he thought, were my magic books. Maria confirmed he took the bait. "He scooped them up the second you were in the elevator," she texted me. He literally smirked. Perfect. My first month at Vanguard was a blur of onboarding and strategy sessions with a leaner. I didn't just want to rebuild my career. I wanted to build an empire, and I wanted to build it on the ashes of Ken's. My plan was simple and ruthless. I was going to poach my entire pipeline. These weren't just accounts to me. They were relationships. I started calling, not with a sales pitch, but with a simple, honest conversation. "Hi, Robert," I'd say. "It's Hannah. I know we were discussing the next phase of your logistics contract. I wanted to let you know I've moved to Vanguard Investments, and more importantly, to wish your daughter Sarah the best of luck at her swim meet this weekend." I didn't need to trash my old firm. I didn't need to mention Ken. All I needed to do was remind them of the connection we had, the trust I had built. I knew their businesses, their challenges, their families. Ken knew what was written in a 3-month-old notebook. One by one, they flipped. A software company I'd landed 3 years ago. A mid-sized manufacturing firm I'd helped navigate a supply chain crisis. A boutique hotel chain. Every single one was a nail in Ken's coffin. Maria kept me updated. The panic was starting to set in at the old firm. Ken was making promises to clients he couldn't keep, referencing old data and getting names wrong. He was floundering, and he was doing it spectacularly. The crown jewel was Stratton Corp. I knew from my real notes that their upcoming merger was creating a massive, urgent need for the exact kind of risk management portfolio that Vanguard specialized in. It was a perfect fit, a deal potentially even larger than Ethelred. While Ken was presumably trying to get the fired Gary on the phone to discuss an obsolete expansion plan, I was having lunch with the new power player, Catherine. We barely talked about business. We talked about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated industry, about her son's obsession with Minecraft, about a book we'd both recently read. At the end of the lunch, she was the one who brought up the deal. "We're going to need a partner we can trust for this merger," she said. "Someone who gets it, someone who does their homework. I think that's you, Hannah." The pieces were all moving into place. The stage was being set. Maria told me the date of their big quarterly review meeting. It was the day the CEO and the entire board reviewed the performance of each division. Ken, as the new star closer, would be presenting his pipeline and projections. It was his moment to prove that Ethelred wasn't a fluke. It would be, I decided, the day his world came crashing down. The day of the meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was sitting in my gleaming new office at Vanguard, the final contracts from Stratton Corp on my desk, waiting to be sent to our press team. My phone was on the table, a direct line to Maria, who was sitting in the back of the conference room at my old company, my loyal spy. "He's starting," her first text read. "Total swagger. He's taking credit for retaining 3 clients who I know have already told him they're leaving." I smiled. Of course he was. Now he's on to new business. He's projecting a massive Q4. Guess who is at the top of his list? I didn't have to guess. Stratton Corp, he's calling it a guaranteed close. He's citing their Asian expansion plan as the primary driver. Oh God, this is cringe. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Maria. Tell me when the CEO starts his remarks." I called Vanguard's head of PR. "Run it," I said. A few minutes passed. My heart was pounding, a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. This was it. "CEO is up. He's congratulating Ken on the forecast. He looks happy," Maria texted. Then, a second later, "Wait, his phone just buzzed. The CFO, S2, they're both looking down." I could picture it perfectly. The press release hitting their phones. Vanguard Investments proudly announces exclusive partnership with Stratton Corp, spearheaded by new VP of Strategic Accounts, Hannah Sterling. Holy shit. Maria's next text was a blur. Hannah. The CEO just stopped talking mid-sentence. He's reading the press release. He's looking at Ken. His face has gone white. Now another email is coming in. The CEO of the hotel chain. He's looking at the screen and then back at Ken's projection slide. Ken has no idea what's happening. He's just standing there smiling like an idiot. One by one, the dominoes fell. As Ken stood at the podium, basking in the glow of his fabricated success, the real-time evidence of his failure was pinging into the inboxes of every executive in the room. The clients he had claimed were secure were emailing to terminate their relationships. The massive deal he was forecasting had just been publicly closed by the woman he had humiliated. He wasn't just incompetent, he was a fraud, and his lies were being exposed in the most brutal, public way imaginable. "Ken is finally catching on," Maria wrote. "He's stammering. The CEO just cut him off." He said, "Ken, what the hell is this? It's a bloodbath, Hannah, a total bloodbath." I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the skyline. I didn't feel elation. I didn't feel joy. I felt a quiet, profound sense of order being restored. The scales, so violently tipped, had finally been balanced. Ken was fired that afternoon for gross incompetence and misrepresenting company performance. The fallout was swift and merciless. 2 days later, an email from a personal account landed in my inbox. It was from him. The subject line was simply Hannah. "I heard what you did," he wrote. "This has ruined me. My reputation is shot. I can't get a job anywhere. I have a family, Hannah, a mortgage. Couldn't you have just moved on? After all our years working together, I thought there was some loyalty. Can't you just call them, tell them it was some aggressive misunderstanding? Please. I'm begging you." It was the final, pathetic twitch of a defeated man. He was appealing to a history he had torched, to a loyalty he had betrayed. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking me to help him escape the consequences of his own actions. I thought about it for a long time. The old me, the one who tried to see the good in everyone, might have felt a pang of pity. But she was gone. I had been forged into someone new, someone harder, someone who understood that some actions have a price that must be paid in full. I didn't reply to him. Instead, I forwarded his email to two people, Eleanor Vance, my new boss, and the CEO of my old company. I added a single line of text above his desperate plea. "For your records," confirming the termination was for cause. It was a final, definitive knockout, a declaration that the game was over and I had won. In the year that followed, I soared. At Vanguard, supported by a team that valued my intellect and my meticulous nature, I didn't just rebuild my pipeline, I doubled it. I closed deals that made the Ethelred account look like a rounding error. I earned back triple the commission I had lost, and the first check I wrote was to Dr. Evans, covering the full cost of my mother's surgery and her recovery. She was thriving now, her laughter no longer strained by pain and worry. I hired Maria away from that toxic wasteland, and she quickly became my right-hand woman, her own brilliance now allowed to shine. My reputation was no longer just for being a top salesperson, but for being a leader who championed talent and demanded integrity. The notebooks were still there, of course. A growing library of black moleskins lining a shelf in my office. They weren't a source of shame or a tool to be stolen anymore. They were the architecture of my success, a testament to the fact that real power isn't in the final handshake, but in the quiet, unseen work that makes it possible. Ken had tried to steal my victory, but he could never steal my work. In the end, the very tool he had ridiculed and exploited had become the precise, elegant instrument of his downfall. The poetic justice was so perfect, so complete, that sometimes, when I looked at my notebooks, all I could do was smile. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Which part of the journey did you connect with the most? Share your thoughts in the comments.